In the exact moment it takes you to process this sentence, the United States government has just borrowed another $70,000. This is not a glitch in the system. This is the terminal math of a collapsing empire. Right now, the national debt has smashed past $38.4 trillion. For the first time in history, Washington is paying over $1 trillion a year just in interest. That is more than the entire budget of the most powerful military on Earth. They tell you everything is fine, but look at the actions of China, Russia, and even Saudi Arabia, and the message is deafening. The age of the dollar is ending. The question isn't if the system will break. It is simply who will be left holding the bag when the music stops. Is it the banks? Or is it you? Before we waste time blaming any specific administration, we must look at the cold, hard arithmetic. This crisis is not a temporary political failure. It is a mathematical inevitability. The United States has entered a structural trap known as a debt spiral, and it operates on a terrifyingly simple principle. Compound interest on a national scale. Consider the velocity of this collapse. The debt is not just growing, it is accelerating. Every single day the sun rises, the US government adds another $6.12 billion to the tab. That is $250 million every hour. This is not borrowing for the future. This is borrowing just to keep the lights on today. Here is the number that should destroy any illusion of safety you have left. 19%. That is the percentage of total tax revenue that is now instantly vaporized just to pay interest on the debt. Imagine you earn $1, and before you can buy food or pay rent, you throw 20 cents directly into a fire just to stop the bank from taking your house. That is the current state of the American economy. We are working 1 day a week just to service the mistakes of the past. You might ask, why not just cut the spending? That is the most dangerous illusion of all. You cannot cut your way out of this. 83% of all spending growth is legally locked into mandatory programs like Social Security, Medicare, and the interest payments themselves. The budget is on autopilot toward a cliff, and the pilots, the politicians, have long since thrown away the controls. They are not steering the ship anymore. They are just rearranging the deck chairs while the hull breaches. But if the math is so obviously broken, why hasn't the system collapsed yet? Because for 50 years the US had a secret weapon: trust. And that weapon just ran out of ammo. To understand why the global order is shifting, you must understand that the dollar's dominance was never based on gold or oil, but on an invisible contract of trust. That contract was quietly torn up in the smoking wreckage of the 2008 financial crisis. For decades, the world used the dollar because it was a neutral tool for trade. But starting around 2012, Washington made a fateful choice to transform that tool into a political leash. Through aggressive financial sanctions and the freezing of foreign assets, the message to the rest of the planet was clear: if you do not follow our rules, we will delete your wealth. The fracture became a canyon under the recent Trump 2.0 policies. By launching an aggressive tariff war that pushed effective rates to 18.6%, the highest since the Great Depression in 1933, the United States effectively shattered the global trade rules. It spent 80 years building. This was not just a trade dispute. It was a signal to every nation that the American market and the currency that fuels it is no longer a reliable partner. The result is a historic erosion of credibility. When you weaponize the global reserve currency, you do not secure your dominance. You simply incentivize your neighbors to build a shield against you. Even traditional European allies, sensing the unpredictability, are now urging their banks to reduce their exposure to US funding. Trust is the ultimate collateral damage. By treating the dollar as a weapon of war, Washington has forced the world to seek a peace treaty elsewhere. So the world started building a lifeboat. But before we look at their escape plan, we have to look at the engine of our own destruction. A paradox that makes this collapse inevitable. It is called the Triffin dilemma. This is the heart of the beast. To understand the collapse, you have to ignore the political theater and look at the engine room. The system is failing because of two specific internal mechanisms that have turned into a terminal doom loop. They are feeding off each other, and neither can be stopped without breaking the machine. The first mechanism is the interest spiral. It is a Ponzi scheme sanctioned by federal law. As the total debt rises, the cost to maintain that debt, the interest rises with it. In a normal world, you pay off debt with earnings. But the United States has reached a threshold where it must borrow new money just to pay the interest on the old money. Think about that. We are taking out a new credit card to pay the minimum balance on the last one. The Congressional Budget Office predicts that by 2035, these interest payments alone will hit $1.8 trillion every year. By 2055, the debt is projected to reach 156% of our entire gross domestic product. We are no longer a country with a debt problem. We are a debt spiral with a country attached to it. But why not just stop borrowing? That brings us to the second mechanism, a paradox known as the Triffin dilemma. This is the fundamental flaw in the dollar's global dominance. Because the dollar is the world's reserve currency, the United States is obligated to run massive trade deficits to supply the rest of the planet with the cash they need to trade. If we stop spending and borrowing, global trade would freeze. But here is the trap. The more of these dollars we pump into the world, the more we dilute their value. Eventually, the world realizes that the safe currency they are holding is being printed into worthlessness to cover American deficits. This exact paradox caused the Nixon shock in 1971, when the US had to abandon the gold standard because it had printed more paper than it had metal. Today we are at that same breaking point, but this time there is no gold standard left to abandon. The mechanics are fatal. The world's elite players know this, and unlike the American public, the world's central banks are not sitting around watching Netflix. They are buying gold at a record pace. This isn't academic theory. This is a cold, calculated revolt happening on the ground right now. If you want to know where the world is headed, stop listening to the news and start watching the moves of the smart money on a geopolitical scale. The era of American financial exceptionalism is being dismantled by a new coalition that has decided they no longer need permission from Washington to trade. Look at the BRICS challenge. This bloc now controls nearly 30% of global GDP and roughly half of the human population. They are no longer just a talk shop, they are an economic engine. Today, over 70% of trade between Russia and China is settled in yuan and rubles, completely bypassing the dollar. This is a massive structural leak in the plumbing of the global financial system. Then there is the death of the petrodollar. Since the 1970s, the world's unwritten rule was simple. If you want energy, you must have dollars. That rule is being rewritten. In 2023 alone, 1/5 of all global oil trades were settled in currencies other than the US dollar. Even Saudi Arabia, the cornerstone of the petrodollar system for half a century, is now openly exploring other currencies for its black gold. But the most telling evidence is the Great Gold Rush. Central banks are voting with their wallets against the dollar. From 2017 to mid-25, the share of gold in global reserves has surged from 11% to 23%. Why would they hoard a barbarous relic? Because gold is the only Tier 1 asset that cannot be frozen by a US Treasury Department and cannot be printed into oblivion by the Federal Reserve. They are building a parallel system, a world where the US dollar is just one option among many, not the only option. And new technology is making this escape route faster and more permanent than anyone realized. The financial order is not just shifting, it is evolving into something the West can no longer switch off. The tool that will drive the final nail into the coffin of dollar dominance is the rise of central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. This is not just about moving from paper to pixels. It is about building an entirely new digital plumbing for the global economy that bypasses the United States entirely. As of mid-2022, over 100 countries, representing more than 95% of global GDP, were already exploring or launching CBDC initiatives. 19 of the 20 G20 nations are now deep into this digital arms race. The crown jewel of this movement is a platform known as Project mBridge. Developed by China, the UAE, Thailand, and Saudi Arabia, mBridge allows digital currencies to be swapped directly between nations in seconds. The logic behind this is a direct threat to American power. It cuts out the middleman. And for the last 80 years, that middleman has always been the US banking system and the SWIFT network. By using mBridge, a company in Abu Dhabi can pay a supplier in Shanghai without ever touching a single US dollar, without paying a fee to a New York bank, and without asking permission from the US Treasury. This technology allows the world to trade in the shadows, completely invisible to the US sanction filter. China's ECNY is already technically ready for cross-border use, creating a frictionless exit ramp from the greenback. We are moving toward a multipolar financial world where geopolitics, not market efficiency, dictates the flow of money. The gatekeepers in Washington are losing their keys, so the world is walking away from the dollar. But you have to ask yourself, what happens to the trillions of dollars currently held overseas when they are no longer needed? They flood back home to the only place that still has to accept them. They come for your purchasing power. Today you do not need a violent market crash to lose everything you have worked for. You only need to hold cash. This is what financial historians and elite investors call quiet dispossession. It is the process where a government, trapped by its own debt, makes a choice to save the system by sacrificing the citizen. Experts like Ray Dalio and Joseph Stiglitz have reached a sobering consensus. The United States has passed the point of no return. We cannot pay this $38 trillion debt through productivity or tax hikes alone. Washington will not choose a messy, loud default that destroys the banks. Instead, they will choose the path of least resistance, devaluing the currency through inflation. Think of inflation as a slow-motion default on the installment plan. Since the gold standard was abandoned in 1971, the dollar has already lost 83% of its purchasing power. That means a dollar today buys only 17 cents of what it did 50 years ago. This is a stealth tax that was never debated in Congress and never voted on by you. It is a levy on the people who did everything right, the people who worked hard and saved their money. As the Treasury prints new billions just to cover the interest payments on old mistakes, your savings are diluted. Every new dollar entering the system makes your dollars worth less. You are paying off the national debt not with your tax returns, but with the very value of your labor and the time you spent away from your family to earn it. The system is not broken for the elites. It is working exactly as it was designed. It is a massive invisible machine that transfers wealth from the savers to the debtors. And as we transition into this new multipolar world, the game is no longer about winning. It is about not being the last one holding a stack of paper that the world no longer wants. This brings us to the most critical realization of our time, the era of the unipolar moment, where the United States unilaterally dictated the rules of global finance is over. We have entered a volatile financial transition period. This is not a sudden cinematic explosion, but a grinding tectonic shift toward a fragmented multipolar world. In this new reality, the movement of money is no longer governed strictly by market efficiency, but by the cold calculations of geopolitics and national survival. The dollar will not vanish overnight. It will simply fade into the background as one of many regional options. But for the American saver and investor, the consequences are profound. The exorbitant privilege of printing the world's reserve currency is ending. We are losing the ability to export our inflation to the rest of the world. For decades, the US could run endless deficits because the world had no choice but to buy our debt. That era of forced compliance is being replaced by a world of competing blocks and alternative systems like the BRICS-led infrastructure. The reality check is stark. The debt already matters. It is already eroding the foundations of economic growth and domestic stability. We are entering a period where the safety of your assets is no longer guaranteed by the flag or the Fed. The question is no longer whether the system will change. It already has. The only question remaining is whether you understand the new rules of the game well enough to survive the transition. History is not kind to empires that choose to ignore the math. Ray Dalio warns that great powers do not usually die from foreign invasion. They perish from internal financial rot. We are not merely watching a market cycle. We are witnessing a slow-motion heart attack of the global financial system. The process of quiet dispossession has already begun. Your leaders have chosen the path of inflation over the pain of austerity, and the world has chosen diversification over a fading dependence on the dollar. The system is resetting, and it does not care if you are ready. There is no easy fix. There is no politician coming to rescue the value of your life's work or the purchasing power of your savings. The only person capable of protecting your future is you, by finally acknowledging the truth that the charts have been screaming for years. If you want to understand the history of money so you do not become its next victim, and if you want to know what happened the last time an empire tried to print its way to salvation, type 1 in the comments. Subscribe to Financial Money History. The next story is one they definitely do not want you to hear.